Welcome back, everyone. I just found this new image of Saint-Germain. Appears to be a master of time and space. And I guess if he really was the god of freedom, then he would have been a master of time and space. I think that's a big part of mastering our own lives, is to become masters of the time that we're given. I'm going to get back into our reading. I have discovered more and more interesting things about Saint-Germain's possible involvement in the American Revolution. And it's quite exciting, and I think I'll go into that next. But let's finish with this source, and then we'll move on. What strange times we live in, and that is a complete understatement. My God, it was just yesterday, there was that huge explosion in Lebanon, and then I understand there was a near simultaneous explosion in Wuhan, of all places. And then I saw a video today from RT, Russia Today, saying that there have been a series of suspicious fires and explosions in Iran. So the explosion in Lebanon, I think we can say safely that was an attack, and to me it looked like a mini nuclear device. And it looks to me, and it reminded me very much of the kinds of attacks that we saw in China back in 2015. There was Tianjin, and then I think there were 6 others within a few months. And it's interesting, it's usually the same MO, it's sort of it's a chemical facility, it's storage for fertilizer, it's fireworks. It's interesting, though, in social media, more people are at least invoking the N word, which is nuclear, and sometimes you get ridiculed for it, but, that's how social media is. People have no respect for surprising or differing opinions, and people seem to have become more and more uncivil week by week over the last couple of years. There seems to be a bottomless, a race to the bottom to see who can be the least civil. And it's almost like a competition to see who can be the least tolerant of a surprising or differing viewpoint. Now, I have been looking into these mini nuke attacks, and they've been occurring since the 80s. I think it was the Beirut barracks bombing was the first, and the cover story was that it was a truck bomb. But for a lot of reasons that I won't go into here, I'm sorry, that just doesn't make any sense. And then you have others, including the 93 attack on the World Trade Center. So to me, they're reviving their campaign of terror. And I'm talking about the international deep state. I'm talking about the international crime syndicate. It's the same gang. It's the same gang that's been oppressing the human race for thousands of years, just in different physical bodies, different incarnations, but a direct line of actual genetic descendants or ideological descendants or um, spiritual descendants. It's the same group, the same tactics. So today I felt a little off balance from all this, wondering, because I have family in New York and I'm here in Mongolia, and Mongolia is still not open, so I can't really fly home. I'm afraid if I fly back to New York, I won't be able to come back to Mongolia. This is really where my life is. So you don't know how far these people are going to take these things. And you don't know what the other side is doing against them and how successful they are. You hear rumors, and sometimes you hear rumors that are quite good and that they're substantiated, they're corroborated, and you can read between the lines and you can feel pretty secure about making a call, but usually you just kind of feel like you're in the dark. So I think it's more important now than ever to spend time and I don't want to say go inside yourself, not to kind of sit in there and wait for the world to sort it out, but to, regularly every day, just as personal maintenance, attend to the self in such a way that brings about the optimal realization of one's higher self. And I mean that higher self to be something that is active in the world. That is, we want to be better versions of ourselves so that we can actually go out into the world. We can actually be effective in this struggle. And I'm not proposing that we fight directly. That might not be a good thing, but we definitely have to be active. And my feeling is that if we are active with the correct spirit and we are taking enlightened actions, we can face down the darkness. So we're back into the Isabel Copper-Oakley book, the Comte de St. Germain, The Secret of Kings. Marquis Saint-Germain, der Wundermann. He was known as der Wundermann. So we were exploring accounts of his life, and this particular part concerns itself with anecdotal evidence regarding his origins. And we were finishing up last time. His real name was Rákóczi, and that he was the sole representative and descendant of the late exiled Prince Rákóczi of Siebenbürgen of the time of Emperor Leopold. That seems a little odd because he did have an older brother and sister. I don't know where they are at this point. Are they still alive? Maybe not. There's a good chance that by this time they would have been maybe passed away for quite a while. Yeah, I think obviously, right? Very good chance of it. So far, going on, this narrative is tolerably accurate, but after this point the author proceeds with the history of what he considers the, quote, unveiling of the, quote, notorious Comte de St. Germain, in which all the various theories about his birth to which we have already referred are retold with embellishments. Amongst other wild reports, it was stated that Monsieur de Saint-Germain had only become acquainted with the Orloffs in Leghorn in 1770, whereas there are various historical proofs showing without doubt that he was in 1762 in St. Petersburg, where he knew the Orloffs well. We have, moreover, heard in Russia that he was staying with Princess Marie Golitsyn in Arkhangelsk on the 3rd of March, 1762. The following details were found in Russia and sent by a Russian friend. This is told by Belyaev, member of the Novole Vremya, author of Old St. Petersburg. So, credible source. The Comte de St was here in the time of Peter III and left when Catherine II came to the throne. Monsieur Belyaev thinks even before Catherine's time. At St. Petersburg, Saint-Germain lived with Count Rotari, the famous Italian painter, who was the painter of the beautiful portraits which are in the Peterhof Palace. The street in where they lived is supposed to be the Grafsky. I think the word is supposed to be Pagulak. This doesn't seem right to me. Pagulak means a small street. I don't know what this is. Periolok? Don't know. And Grafsky comes from Graf Count, near the Anichkov Bridge, where the palace is, on the Nevsky. Saint-Germain was a splendid violinist. He played like an orchestra. In the story of the Razumovsky family, Alexander Razumovsky was reported to have spoken of a beautiful moonstone Saint-Germain had in his possession. Monsieur Belyaev has seen, he cannot remember where now, a piece of music, some air for the harp, dedicated to the Countess Ostermann by Saint-Germain's own hand, signed. It is bound beautifully in red Moroccan. The date is about 1760. Monsieur Belyaev thinks that Saint-Germain was not in Moscow. He says that the Usupov, I have to see that in Cyrillic, or I can't pronounce it properly. Yusupov family has many manuscripts in old chests, and that Saint-Germain was in relations with the prince Yusupov maybe, to whom he gave the elixir for long life. So if there's anything to that, that explains, may explain a little something about the Count. He says, too, that Saint-Germain did not bear the name of Saltykov in Russia, or Saltykov in Russia, but that in Vienna he did take this name. About the music signed by Saint-Germain, Monsieur Belyaev now reflects or recollects that it belonged to him himself. He bought it at some sale and had it for some time, and then he gave it to the famous composer Peter Tchaikovsky as a present. It must be now in Tchaikovsky. Is this Tchaikovsky? Yeah, that sounds likely. No. Tchaikovsky's papers? No, this is before Tchaikovsky. There was another composer named Tchaikovsky. Another Tchaikovsky. I don't know. I'd have to check the dates on this. Interesting, though. Monsieur Belyaev thinks it very unlikely that it could be found, especially as at Tchaikovsky's sudden death, all was left without any directions being given about the property. That's Peter Tchaikovsky, Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky. But that would be, he had it for some time. I don't know when Tchaikovsky was born. The famous Tchaikovsky. It says famous composer. So, interesting connection. Maybe we can check up on that. We have said that the political events in his family, and to some extent, had to some extent shattered the life of Monsieur Saint-Germain. One remarkable instance of this we will now cite. It is, as far as we know, the only one in which he himself makes any direct reference to it, and it occurs sometime later than the events which we have just been relating, after the return of the Margrave from Italy, whither he had gone in 1776, and where he had heard some of the legends and fabrications above referred to. He appears to have sent the writer whom we have quoted to Schwalbach to see the Graf Zarogi and to test his bona fides. Rather rude thing to do. Why would he do that? What's interesting to me here is that we're in 1776, and this might have been about the time when Saint-Germain was in the Americas, that he was involved in the American Revolution. According to other sources, he would have been right in the middle of it at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and he might have left immediately after that. So we continue the story as he gives it. 1776. On his arrival, he found Monsieur de Saint-Germain ill in bed. So I instantly thought, oh, perhaps he had traveled. Had come back from the colonies, and perhaps the trip had been a difficult one and he was not well. We're going to have to look for corroborating sources, I suppose. So we're finding Saint-Germain ill in bed. When the matter was explained to him, he admitted with perfect coolness that he had assumed from time to time all the names mentioned, even down to that of Saltykov. But he said he was known on all sides and to many people under these names as a man of honor, and that if any calumniator were venturing to accuse him of nefarious transactions, he was ready to exculpate himself in the most satisfactory manner as soon as he knew of what he was accused and who the accuser was who dared to attack him. And keeping in mind that this is someone who was defended by Louis XV and other monarchs, so it must have been extremely unpleasant to be accused by very low-ranking aristocrats of perhaps being deceptive in any way. He steadily asserted that he had not told the Margrave any lies with reference to his name and his family. The proofs of his origins, however, were in the hands of a person on whom he was dependent, i.e. the Emperor of Austria, a dependence which had brought on him, in the course of his life, the greatest espionage. And when he was asked why he had not informed the Margrave about the different names under which he had appeared in so many different places, the Graf Zarogi answered that he was under no obligations to Margrave, and that since he offended no one and did no person any harm, he would only give such personal information after and not before he had dealings with them. The Graf said he had never abused the confidence of the Margrave. He had given his real name. After this, he still remained at Schwalbach. A little later, the author of the paragraph just quoted remarks, "What resources Saint-Germain had to defray the necessary expenses of his existence is hard to guess." So we have, to me, incredibly rude. I forgot to turn on my airplane mode. I don't want my messages showing up here. Incredibly rude. But I imagine, he was, I imagine throughout his life, and Indeed, it is said elsewhere that there were persons who were jealous, who perhaps didn't understand what he was about, and resented his influence, and perhaps had some kind of deep-seated spiritual antipathy toward him, and perhaps were working for the other side and felt threatened. So it's interesting. It says that he stayed on at Schwalbach. I'm not sure I would have. And then the insinuation here is that we don't know how he managed to pay for it. Again, incredibly rude. It appears curious to us that the writer knew so little of contemporary history. As we have seen, all the sons of Prince Rákóczi were amply provided for, and the proofs were even more accessible than they are in our day. He goes on to say in conclusion, it would be an ungrateful task to declare that this man was a swindler, for this proofs are required and they're not to be had. So he's saying, I think, perhaps he was a swindler, but I don't have any proof of it. I mean, this is classic. This is what we see today, They don't need proofs. They just make insinuations and use sort of cheap methods of psychological persuasion, cheap, dirty psychological insinuations. You see this in this camp, I call them the oligarchy and all their hangers-on. They have this kind of sly and slimy way of even lacking proof or evidence, they continue with insinuations, knowing that even without evidence, the insinuations can burrow into the consciousness of the reader or the audience, be it as it may. And you see the biggest example of this would be even after this prolonged and ridiculous Russian interference nonsense, and even after Trump was cleared, even today, Hillary Clinton is still bringing it up as if it's true, knowing that she can count on probably many millions of people who still believe it, even though it was disproven. So they work against basic principles of justice. They use cheap psychological tactics. They make insinuations, and they use personal slander as a weapon. So nothing is different. But then I think the text does turn around here. It says, this is truly an ingenious statement, but borders somewhat on libel. Yeah, somewhat. To speak of anyone as a swindler without proof is beyond the bounds of ordinary fairness. And it is especially incongruous in view of the final paragraph, which is as follows. So he has to admit, right? Quote, as long as the Graf had dealings with the Markgraf, he never asked for anything, never received anything of the slightest value, and never mixed himself up in anything which did not concern him. On account of his extremely simple life, his wants were very limited. When he had money, he shared it with the poor. Okay, still not accurate. And still that's not a retraction of the insinuation. If we compare these words with those spoken of Monsieur de Saint-Germain by his friend Prince Charles of Hesse, we shall find that they are in perfect accord. The only wonder is that a writer who speaks such words of praise can even hint that his subject might be a, quote, swindler, unquote. If such words can be rightly spoken of an adventurer, then would it be well for the world if a new, more of like sort could be found, indeed. We shall find similar extraordinary contradictions in various writers as we proceed further with the life of Saint-Germain. Let's see, chapter 2, his travels on knowledge. Okay, we'll read a little more. This is Madame Blavatsky, because I can see it's taken from the Secret Doctrine, and I just would rather skip over that. Let's dive in. Let us now trace, as far as we can, with any detailed information, the steps of Monsieur Saint-Germain in some of his extended travels. That he had been in Africa, India, and China, we gather from various hints he gives us, and also from fact stated by many writers at different times. That such travels should seem aimless and trivial to the same writers is not a matter of surprise, but to students of mysticism, and especially those to whom the Great Lodge is in fact mankind, to those students, the widely extended travels of this messenger from the Lodge will not be surprising. Rather, they will seek below the surface and try to understand the mission and the work that he came to do among the children of men. We must bear in mind, moreover, that in the ancient world, the arts and sciences were regarded as divine gifts, the gifts of the gods. Kings of the divine dynasties, they gave the first impulse to civilization and perfection of all the arts and sciences. Conceited in their shallow ignorance, the generality of mankind scorned the gifts and turned away from the givers. Some few centuries ago, such givers and teachers were silenced at the stake, like Giordano Bruno and many others, whom time has now justified in the eyes of men. Then, later, after the reaction of free thought in the 18th century, we find Mesmer and the Comte de St. giving up, not their lives, but their good names and characters in trying to help those to whom they were sent by the Great Lodge. Let us now take up the thread of these travels and, in order to make them as clear as possible, follow them in order of their dates. These range, as we have seen in our last chapter, from 1710 to 1822. We shall, however, not be able to deal very fully with each period, for Monsieur de Saint-Germain often disappeared for many months at a time. The earliest records we can gather are as follows. So, on the previous page, I think there was an allusion to him being in Italy for all of 1776, but there are no details. And now we have here the claim that he often disappeared for many months at a time. So it certainly would have been possible for him to have gone to the colonies, the American colonies, and returned. We can say that it's not impossible. Not even highly unlikely. Let's say that it's possible. Let's see. Next anecdote. This is from, I think, 1710. There appeared at the court in these days an extraordinary man who called himself Comte de St. At first, he distinguished himself through his cleverness and the great diversity of his talents, but in another respect, he soon aroused the greatest astonishment. The old Countess Georgi, who 50 years earlier, so I think we're in 1760 or thereabouts, 50 years earlier had accompanied her husband to Venice, where he had the appointment of ambassador, lately met Saint-Germain at Mademoiselle de Pompadour. For some time, she watched the stranger with signs of the greatest surprise, in which was mixed not a little fear. Finally, unable to control her excitement, she approached the Count more out of curiosity than in fear. Will you have the kindness to tell me," said the Countess, "whether your father was in Venice about the year 1710. "No, madam," replied the Count, quite unconcerned. "It is very much longer since I lost my father, but I myself was living at Venice at the end of the last and beginning of this century. I had the honor to pay you court then, and you were kind enough to admire a few barcarolles of my composing, which we used to sing together." "Forgive me, but that is impossible. The Comte de St. I knew in those days was at least 45 years old, and you, at the outside, are that age at present." "Madame," replied the Count, smiling, "I'm very old." "But then you must be nearly 100 years old." "That is not impossible." And the Count recounted to Madame Georgie a number of familiar little details which had reference in common to both, to their sojourn in the Venetian states. I think it was, let's see, no, it still would have been the Venetian Republic at that time. He offered, if she still doubted him, to bring back to her memory certain circumstances and remarks which... No, interrupted the old ambassadress. "I'm already convinced. For all that, you are a most extraordinary man, a devil." "For pity's sake," exclaimed Germain in a thundering voice, "no such names." He appeared to be seized with a cramp-like trembling in every limb, and left the room immediately. "I mean to get to know this man more intimately." Okay, now in one of the very early videos, we had a different telling of this story in which he said, but that's impossible, and he denies that he was in Venice. And he insinuates to people around him that perhaps she's not remembering correctly. So, which version do we believe? And then she goes on to describe him. Saint-Germain is of medium height and elegant manners. His features are regular, his complexion brown, his hair black, his face mobile and full of genius. His carriage bears the impress and mobility common only to the great. The Count dresses simply, but with taste. His only luxury consists of a small number of diamonds, with which he is fairly covered. He wears them on every finger, and they are set in his snuff boxes and his watches. One evening he appeared at court with shoe buckles, which Herr Gontaut, an expert on precious stones, estimated at 200,000 francs. A matter worthy of remark is that the Count speaks English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese equally perfectly. So much that he converses with any of the inhabitants of the above countries in their mother tongue, and they are unable to discover the slightest foreign accent. The learned and the Oriental scholars have proved the knowledge of Count Saint-Germain. The former found him more apt in the languages of Homer and Virgil than themselves. With the latter he spoke Sanskrit, Chinese, Arabic, in such a manner as to show them that he had made some lengthy stay in Asia, and that the languages of the East were but poorly learned in the colleges of Louis the Great and Montaigne. The Comte de St. accompanied on the piano without music not only every song, but also the most difficult concerti played on various instruments. Rameau was much impressed with the playing of this dilettante, and especially struck at his improvising. And remember that back in those days, dilettante was not considered an insult. It was a form of praise. It was an acknowledgement of someone who was not a professional, but who had attained a high degree of proficiency that showed diligence and sincerity in the approach. So probably aristocrats could not have could not have taken on the profession of musician. So here dilettante is an appropriate word and actually a form of praise. The Count paints beautifully in oils, but that which makes his painting so remarkable is a particular color, a secret, which he has discovered and which lends to the painting an extraordinary brilliancy. In his historical pieces, Saint-Germain always introduces into the dress of the women, that is in the paintings, sapphires, rubies, and emeralds of such brilliant hue that they seem to have borrowed their beauty from the original gems. Ban Lu, who never tires in his admiration of the surprising coloring, has often requested the Count to let him participate in his secret. The latter, however, will not divulge it. Without attempting to sit in judgment on the knowledge of a fellow being of whom at this moment that I'm writing, court and town, what is this? Of whom I am writing, I don't know, bother, court and town, have exhausted all surmises, one can, I think, well assessed the portion. This really does need to be proofread. I just can't penetrate what they're trying, what the text is trying to say. That a portion of his miracles is due, I can well assess that a portion of his miracles is due to his knowledge of physics and chemistry, in which sciences he is well grounded. At all events, it is palpable that his knowledge has lain the seeds for him of sound good health, a life of which also endowed him with the means of preventing the ravages of time from affecting the body. Among other statements concerning the Count's astounding qualities made to the favorite by Madame Georgie, after her first meeting with the Count, after this lapse of years, that was during oh my God, her first stay in Venice. She received from him an elixir which for fully a quarter of a century preserved unaltered the youthful charms she possessed at 25. Elderly gentleman whom Mademoiselle Pompadour questioned concerning this particular incident gave the assurance, probably an elderly gentleman, gave the assurance that this was the truth, adding that the standing still in youthful appearance of Madame Georgie, supported by the testimony of these old men, would make it appear still more probable. One evening, at a party, Saint-Germain accompanied several Italian airs for the young Comtesse, afterwards so celebrated under the name of Comtesse de Genlis, then aged 10 years. When she had finished singing, the Count said to her, "In 5 or 6 years you will have a very beautiful voice, which you will preserve a long time. In order to perfect the charm, you should also preserve your beauty. This will be your happy fate between your 16th and 17th year." "But Count," answered the child, while allowing her pretty fingers to glide over the notes, "that does not lie in anyone's power." "Oh yes," answered the Count carelessly. "Only tell me whether it would give you pleasure to remain at that age." "Truly, it would be charming." "Well, I promise it you." And Saint-Germain spoke of other matters. So he's saying, if you'd like to stay, when you get to be 16 or 17, if you would like to stay in that physical state, if you'd like to appear 16 and 17 in perpetuity, just ask me, I can make it happen. Encouraged by the friendliness of this fashionable man, the Countess's mother ventured to ask him if Germany was his fatherland. Madame, said he, sighing deeply, there are some things of which one may not speak. Suffice it to know that at 7 years of age I was wandering in woods, and that a price was set on my head. On my birthday, my mother, whom I was not to see again, bound her portrait round my arm. I will show it to you. At these words, Saint-Germain threw up his sleeve and showed the ladies the miniature of an exceptionally beautiful woman, but represented in rather a peculiar costume. To what date does this dress belong? Asked the young countess. Without answering this question, the count put down his sleeve again and brought forward another topic. So I think she suspected that the dress being worn by the woman in the portrait looked of a considerably earlier period. Every day must have been a spooky moment. Every day one was surprised by a fresh miracle in Comte de St. company. Some little time previously he had brought Madame de Pompadour a bonbonnière which was universally admired. It was worked very beautifully in black enamel, and on the lid was an agate. The Count begged the Marquis to place the bonbonnière near the fire. A few minutes later, she went to take it away. How great was the astonishment of all present! The agate had disappeared, and in its place was to be seen a pretty shepherdess in the midst of her flock. After the bonbonnière had again been placed near the fire, the shepherdess disappeared, and the agate reappeared. I think bonbonnière, I think that's something you keep jewels in. It's kind of a box. I'll have to check that. This episode was written down in 1750, but the facts mentioned took place in 1723. It must be carefully noticed that all the personal friends of Monsieur de Saint-Germain were in high position, chiefly Austrians and Hungarians, all men of high birth and noble family, his own kith and kin. Among them we find Prince Konitz, Prince Ferdinand Lobkowitz, Graf Zobor, Graf Maximilian Joseph von Lamberg, men of public position and well-known families. From 1737 to 1742, our mystic was at the court of the Shah of Persia, and it is here that he probably acquired his knowledge of diamonds and precious stones, for according to his own very credible statement, it was here that he began to understand the secrets of nature. But his arduously acquired knowledge leads us to infer a long period of careful study. These hints we gather from F.W. von Barthold in his interesting work, and they confirm the statement made by another writer that Monsieur de Saint-Germain had been pursuing his researches in Persia. Then we next find him in England during the Jacobite Revolution of 1745, suspected as a spy and arrested. Two very interesting extracts can here be quoted. Let's get into that next time, because there's a lot rather more to say about this, and I want to look into a couple of things about the Jacobins, about his arrest. I just want to do a little background, and also, yeah, we're at 45 minutes, so anyway, wish everyone the best, and until next time.